Welcome to Sociology of Gender. What is gender? Is gender rooted in biological differences between men and women? Many people tend to think so, but actually there's a difference between one's gender and one's sex. We can think of sex as the biological differences between men and women. We can think of gender as a set of socially constructed practices, relations, and traits attributed to men and women. Gender operates at all levels of the social world. We can often think about this in terms of the ways we think of particular characteristics or traits as being masculine or feminine. We can think of sex as an ascribed status, meaning that it is assigned to us, often at birth, and for many people this is based on what their genitalia looks like. Gender is an achieved status, meaning that gender is something we engage in and accomplish in our daily lives. Gender is socially constructed and operates on two levels, structural and interactional. For example, the fact that men get paid more than women creates gender inequality in employment on a larger societal level. On an interactional level, babies are often gendered where people buy blue clothes for boys and pink clothes for girls. Think further about the ways that gender is structured. What gendered opportunities or inequalities exist in these different institutional contexts? School, the K through 12 level, family, government and politics, media, workplace, sports, higher education. Related to gender inequality is the concept of patriarchy. Being male is associated with more privileges across different social arenas, especially those involving power. Next, we will move into the concept of the gender binary. With gender, we often assume that there is dimorphism, two kinds of bodies, men and women. However, this has been constructed. At one point, there was a one-sex model, with men and then inferior categories such as women. Women were seen as biologically similar to men, but imperfect, rather than the opposite of men. About 1800, Anglo-Europeans reconceptualized how they imagined sex differences, treating men and women not as superior and inferior versions of the same creature, but as polar opposites. Here, the two-sex model was born. When women were reconceptualized as having an opposite kind of body, these biological differences were used to explain social differences. For example, instead of seeing women's subordination as a result of men being cast as more powerful, women's subordination was seen as biologically based. In other words, they were seen as naturally weaker than men and were not afforded power in the same way as men. This is one example of how gender, and in particular the gender binary, have been socially constructed over time. It is important to note that not all groups have a gender binary. Some cultures have what is called a third gender category. For example, many Native American societies have the Berdache, people born with male genitalia but who live as neither men nor women, combining characteristics of both. They had a high status in society. Now let's consider the ways that gender is done on an interactional level. Sociologists often talk about the ways that people do gender in their everyday lives. As I stated earlier, we can think of gender being something that is accomplished in everyday interaction. For example, in the 1950s, sociologist Garfinkel studied a transgendered woman named Agnes. Garfinkel found that Agnes faced an ongoing task of becoming a woman. She had to not only learn how to dress or behave, but also how to be a woman in different contexts. Agnes was once sunbathing on her front lawn in a bathing suit, and her boyfriend became quite upset, as this was not something that proper women did in the 1950s. So we can see from this example that gender is something that is learned. Similar to Agnes, we all perform gender in how we present ourselves, through dress, hair, having facial hair, etc., behavior, mannerisms, interests, and practices. Consider the ways that you do gender. What ways did you do gender today? Think about your actions as soon as you woke up this morning. Here are some gender terms that are important to know. Gender role: qualities, mannerisms, duties, and cultural expectations accorded a specific gender. Think about the specific ways that men are expected to act versus women. For example, we often tell boys and men not to cry and to be tough and strong, while we encourage girls and women to show emotion and to be weak and passive. Next, there's gender identity. Gender identity is what one feels their gender to be. Sometimes what someone feels their gender is does not necessarily match up with their assigned sex. A person with male genitalia, for example, can be labeled male, but feel as though he is a woman. Finally, there's gender attribution. This means that you're deciding what gender someone is based on an intricate system of cues. These cues could be physical appearance, mannerisms, also based on context and based on power in the interaction. This happens in everyday interaction, often upon first meeting someone. We engage in gender attribution all of the time. When you first meet someone, you often notice things about them that you can characterize as being commonly associated with men or with women. And compiling all of that data, we have collected in a few seconds of interaction, physical appearance, mannerisms, behavior, etc. We gender them, marking them as men or women, and then expect them to act accordingly. People often get very uncomfortable when they cannot figure out someone's gender or when a person violates the gender norms that they are expected to perform.